Thank you so much for having me here today. It's a pleasure to be speaking to you all. Social media has engulfed our lives in the most positive and negative way possible. It has brought us together in ways that are really unimaginable. We know almost hourly what our friends are doing, where they are, what they love, and who they're connecting with. But it has also ripped us apart as a society, as all that is real is being overshadowed by noise, facades, artificial happiness, unreliable news, perfectly created timelines of our lives. When I meet new people, it's difficult to pinpoint who I am in just one word. So I often joke and say I'm a model-in-law, sort of like mother-in-law. I'm a model and brand ambassador. I've been in the industry since I was 14 years old. I studied law, but I'm not practicing. But I aim to be a role model in all that I do because I feel a social responsibility to the many young boys and girls following my work. I also aim to create a new model of philanthropy and giving through social media. There is immense untapped potential online that every person, despite their background, can and should be involved in. Philanthropy lies at the heart of what I do, both in the fashion world and outside. Having studied and focused on a number of humanitarian areas like refugee law and international human rights law, I've been able to discover the causes that speak to me in my heart. But there is one quality no degree, no court, no profession can ever teach you: empathy. I was born and raised in Sydney, Australia, to a Lebanese family. Thanks to my parents, I was fortunate to have had a very strong Arabic influence at home. From the food we ate to the language we spoke, and every single year my father used to take us to Lebanon to be immersed in the Arabic way of life and meet our extended families. The trips were beautiful. They were really beautiful, but they were real. For the first time in my life, I saw children tall enough just to peer into car windows begging for food and money. Fast forward many years later, I was 21 years old and shopping with a friend of mine from Australia in Beirut. We came across a 7-year-old boy named Mohammed on the street. Mohammed looked like a rag doll. He was tired, dirty, barefoot, his eyes barely open. I asked him a few basic questions about his family and his background. He told me that his mother is at home with his siblings. His father had passed away and he had arrived here on a bus. I asked him if he was hungry and wanted to eat. He said yes. So I held his hand and we started walking to a fast food restaurant. Along the way, we bumped into another young boy in a similar situation and his brother, and they joined us as well. Inside, Mohammed pointed at the chicken and said he wanted meat. We placed our order and picked it up amongst a few awkward stares and approving nods from strangers. And then we went to a bench outside. We opened up the food, but Mohammed wasn't eating. I said to him, "Hamad, why aren't you eating?" He looked up at me and he said, "It's very rude to eat when other people are not eating and you didn't order any food." A 7-year-old refugee child, starving, had more empathy and savoir-vivre than a lot of adults I know. As I started crying, naturally, one of the other young boys went into a convenience store and purchased, with the little money he had, a small packet of tissues for me. Empathy. From a very young age, all I wanted to do was to build bridges between my two worlds in order to find my identity. I'm Lebanese, but I lived this privileged life in Australia, and how could I forget about these children on the street in Lebanon? I was torn between the two worlds, and I knew there was a big divide amongst the two worlds. There were even divides and walls within communities, ethnicities, and religions within Australia, and you never really fit in when your mother packs you tabbouleh and hummus for lunch, and the rest of the children are having Vegemite sandwiches. Funnily enough, in Lebanon, I was always seen as the Aussie girl with her Aussie accent from Bondi Beach. So I started my charity work at 17 years old with organizations based in the two countries and beyond. I advocated for whatever spoke to me, whatever cause that was universal, no matter where you are from, what background you have, or which country you live in, you will relate. From orphanages to children's cancer centers, and we even helped build wells in Rwanda and Orissa, India. I wanted to help others, and I knew it was a way to unite people, to relate and find meaning. As far back as I could remember, It's funny because my parents used to always tell me, you're going to grow up to be a humanitarian, you lawyer. I was always fighting other people's battles. I was standing up for those being bullied at school and often getting in trouble for it, constantly arguing the alternative, challenging thoughts and ideas, rebelling against the norm, and I was incredibly stubborn. I knew what I wanted all the time, and I never took no for an answer, which is how I got into fashion. I love fashion, but I've always been deeply empathetic towards others, putting myself in their shoes no matter what they are going through, good or bad. And I knew I wanted to combine both worlds. Why not? Why can't anyone from any industry help or be interested in humanity? Do I have to be a charity worker or a humanitarian lawyer, a philanthropist, or have billions of dollars to help? Or do I just have to care and combine that with the ability to reach online? There comes a time when one must take a position that is neither safe, nor politic, nor popular, but he must take it because conscience tells him it is right. These are popular words from Martin Luther King Jr. So, why social media, you may ask? A lot of charity work and generosity can, and arguably, should be done under the radar, which is the way I started many years ago. You see, philanthropy is a culture. It's about making connections rather than raising as much money as possible. With the rise of online connectivity, people are able to build relationships with organizations through discussion, volunteering, and online activism. And I'm not talking about thoughts and prayers. I'm not talking about petitions or slacktivism. I'm talking about a community that engages with the mission and goal of organizations, and they choose what speaks to them. A community where reach and resonance is limitless. The refugee crisis happening in multiple countries was the cause that spoke to me. Last year, I went on 2 very successful humanitarian missions, success in terms of awareness and fundraising. In July, I visited the Zaatari camp in Jordan, the largest Syrian refugee camp in the world, hosting 80,000 Syrian refugees. It was part of an international campaign I fronted for Louis Vuitton and UNICEF in order to raise money for the Syrian refugees. In December, I went to Kutupalong camp in Cox Bazar in Bangladesh to meet the Rohingya people fleeing Myanmar into Bangladesh. That was a trip with UNHCR, and there were 600,000 of them. The 2 experiences were very different and very overwhelming. As I walked in the camps and I looked up at the thick walls and the barbed wire, then looked down at the beautiful art some of the Syrian refugees drew on the caravans, I couldn't help but imagine all the potential in there, all the artists, the medics, the doctors, the tailors, the filmmakers that could exist if they were given the right opportunities in life to live and to succeed. I wanted to translate what I was experiencing in the camp onto social media, and what a difficult task it was, because there are sights, there are emotions, stories, facial expressions only the eye can comprehend. How can I translate the hole in my heart, the hole that I felt when I saw an elderly Syrian refugee man crying next to his fruit? I wanted to so badly amplify their voices, so I gave it my best shot. I took my followers through a timeline during my trip in Bangladesh. Who the Rohingya people are, why are they fleeing? Then I took my audience into their lives. I got to know individual sufferers and translated them in a raw and unedited way. Their heartaches were scattered on my 400 or so thousand followers' timelines for a couple of days. And out of all the messages I received and all the donations UNHCR may have received, the messages that made me the happiest were the ones that said that nothing else on their timelines mattered for those couple of days. Everything seemed like noise except the heartbreaking and poignant stories of the refugees. And then people started asking, how can I help? Well, it took me 3 days to get to Kutupalong camp. It took hours and hours listening and absorbing to the stories of the refugees. But it was at the click of a finger that hundreds and thousands of people learned what was happening from a genuine and unfiltered perspective. This unprecedented power to spread and share, to inform ourselves is at our fingertips. The internet, specifically social media, where we all meet, is the most democratic means in mass media. We're able to share, debate, speak of, research a myriad of topics. And yes, there may be censorships and walls around in certain places about certain topics, but it doesn't stop the majority of us, the majority luckier than half of the world's population, living in the shadows of the grey wall, to speak out. And instead of switching off from our daily stresses, through mindless escapism, through the recurring flick of our thumbs on those timelines, why don't we switch on more? Switch on by appreciating the blessings in our life and the power we hold as the lucky half, and be aware of our echo chambers and the potential to educate ourselves. The humanitarian mission sparked a lot of coverage and discussion from all the major fashion publications and more, which I was very, very grateful for. There is a recurring question that journalists often ask me. They say to me, Jessica, what is success to you? And I ask you today, what is success to you? Is it a number? Is it a feeling? See, I decided at a very young age that my success, the ultimate success, is the imprint I leave behind in this world. As American philosopher and psychologist William James said, the great use of life is to spend it for something that will outlast it. I will not see my success today or tomorrow, but long after my message and the message and actions of so many other people trying to make a difference is infiltrated, spread, and repeated. So today, I want you all to think about this very important idea. For the first time in human history, for the first time ever, we are leaving behind the biggest trace of information about ourselves for future generations to see. Can you imagine that long after we are gone, our great-great-great-great-grandchildren will know what we were doing in April 2018? Everything we have ever researched, posted, liked, will be at their fingertips. Can you now envisage accessing that kind of information in the form of a very simple Instagram account about your ancestors? Wouldn't it be mind-blowing to go online right now and see a visual diary of hundreds of posts throughout their lives with dates and captions capturing their thoughts and emotions? What information did they leave behind? What information are we leaving behind for future generations to see about us? Is it indicative of our stance regarding humanity at this period of time? Are we posting real content? Did we fight for causes that mattered most? Were we activists in our local communities? Did we care about the extinction of certain species, or cared and opened our doors for refugees? Will they be proud? Will they say, wow, 200 years ago, my great-great-great-great-great-grandmother, Jessica, tried to fight for the marginalized Rohingya people and educated her followers about who they are individually. The 87-year-old grandfather who has fled 4 times in his life. The 13-year-old, now the head of his household, because both his parents were killed. Will they see that I used my status in the fashion industry and chose to work with conscionable brands? What if these visual diaries we create online are the legacy we leave behind for our descendants, for them to find inspiration from and continue the story themselves? I would like to conclude with the story of a young girl who really brought me hope and encouragement to continue advocating. During my visit to the Zaatari camp in Jordan, I entered a family's caravan which happens to be their home. 7 family members live there in not so ideal, hot and arid conditions. The family doesn't have much privacy. In fact, the family doesn't have much at all. I met their eldest daughter, 16-year-old Umayma. Umayma knew that I had studied law, and she wanted to so eagerly show me something in her bedroom, which was a small makeshift area with her bed and cupboard. We went there, and she proceeded to take out a folder from under her, and she showed me the names, ages, and marital status of every young girl in that 80,000-person refugee camp. Umayma, in her most dire conditions, was combating child marriage and making waves so much that she actually reached media outside who ended up covering her story. As a result, she was not only able to successfully educate parents and young girls on the disadvantages of getting married young, but she actually made a difference, and we saw numbers decline. She didn't see herself as a victim, she thought about them. She is not only an example of change, but change that occurs within, breaking down walls, starting with the communities around us, and building up the story, making it so big we spread it online where it will forever stay long after we are gone. Growing up, I was heavily influenced by Lebanese-American writer, poet, and artist Gibran Khalil Gibran, as many other Lebanese were. He said, "Tenderness and kindness are not signs of weakness and despair, but manifestations of strength and resolution. We all have tenderness and kindness within us, and if we channel that towards those whose voices have been silenced, along with empathy, we hold the power to spread good. We possess the weapon to shatter walls and bring light to humanity on our timelines and write stories future generations will one day read about." Thank you.